On the quietest night in a small library, a poor, bookish virgin looks up, and the most feared Mafia boss steps from the shadows. He lays down a debt, a ring, and a prophecy. By winter, you'll birth me twins. 1 hour, 2 contracts, her aunt's life on the line. He offers protection with rules she controls. No touch without consent, no locked doors, no lies. But the streets answer with gunfire, and a rival wants her as bait. Inside his glass fortress, heat sparks where it shouldn't, while a traitor whispers her name into the dark. When the warehouse burns and she's taken, he comes alone, bleeding, unarmed, unstoppable. Then a stolen lab result drops like a bomb. Twins might be real. Is his prophecy a trap or a vow? Who inside his circle sold her out? And when winter finally arrives, will she give him heirs or deliver his ruin? The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Grace shelved the last book of the evening. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the spine, mind elsewhere, on hospital rooms and mounting bills. The quiet of the library, usually so comforting, felt oppressive tonight. The phone's sharp ring cut through the silence. Grace hurried to her desk, recognizing the hospital's number. "Ms. Whitlow? Your aunt's evening vitals are stable but still concerning." The nurse's voice was professionally detached. "Blood pressure remains irregular." "Thank you for updating me," Grace replied, glancing at the clock. 8:07 p.m. Just enough time to finish closing. As she hung up, the courier entrance chimed. A man in a delivery uniform placed a thick manila envelope on her desk. "Delivery for Grace Whitlow, Whitlow Trust Materials." Trust? Grace had never heard of any trust. The courier disappeared before she could question him. Her hands shook as she broke the seal, pulling out a leather-bound ledger. Page after page of medical payments, procedures, medications. All for her aunt, all marked as paid in full by Vexley Holdings. The air shifted behind her. A shadow stretched across her desk and Grace froze. Heavy silence pressed against her ears as measured footsteps approached. She turned slowly. In the warm pool of her desk lamp stood Ronan Vexley himself, Chicago's most feared Mafia boss. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, making him look more corporate shark than criminal. But his eyes, steel gray and utterly cold, gave away the predator beneath. The trust wasn't charity. His voice was quiet, controlled. It was investment in our future arrangement. Grace's throat went dry. What arrangement? "By winter, you'll birth me twins." He stated it like an immutable fact, like gravity or death. "That's impossible." Her voice cracked. "You're insane. 2 paths lie before you, Grace." He placed both hands on her desk, looming without touching her. "Default on the medical debt. Watch your aunt lose care and your life crumble. Or accept my protection through marriage, secure your aunt's future, and receive a legals endowment that ensures you'll never want again." Grace's hand fumbled for the security phone. "Get out or I'm calling!" Her cell phone buzzed. The hospital again. Her stomach dropped as she answered. "Ms. Whitlow, your aunt's blood pressure has crashed critically. We need you here immediately for consent forms." Grace's knees weakened. Ronan straightened, pulling out his phone. "My car is waiting. We'll make every light between here and Northwestern Memorial." "I'm not agreeing to anything," Grace said sharply, but her eyes darted to the clock. Taking an Uber would waste precious minutes. Noted. He gestured to the door. "Shall we?" The sleek black car whispered through traffic, making impossible time as lights miraculously turned green ahead of them. Ronan sat across from her, maintaining careful distance while murmuring directions to the driver through an intercom. At the hospital, fluorescent reality crashed back. Grace rushed through corridors to the ICU while Ronan's measured steps followed. The billing office confirmed what the ledger showed. Every payment traced back to Vexley subsidiaries. "Tomorrow's procedure requires a guarantor," the administrator explained, sliding forms across the desk. Before Grace could panic, Ronan's hand appeared with a fountain pen. He signed with elegant precision, then turned to her. "Your aunt's continued protection now depends on hearing my full proposal. 1 hour of your time." Grace's head spun as she left the ICU. Ronan waited by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city. Chicago stretched below them like a blanket of stars. "By winter, you'll birth me twins," he repeated softly. Not a threat this time, a prophecy. Grace pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "I need air." "I'll provide it." He checked his watch. "We have an hour before midnight. I know a neutral location where we can discuss terms properly." Grace watched his reflection in the window, this dangerous man who'd woven himself into the fabric of her life long before she knew his name. Her aunt's monitors beeped steadily behind the ICU doors. Each beat reminded her of the choice before her, or rather, the lack of choice. 1 hour, she said finally, nothing more. Ronan nodded once, already turning toward the elevator. His phone appeared again, presumably arranging their next destination. Grace followed, her sensible flats silent against his measured footsteps on the polished hospital floor. The same black car waited below, engine purring softly in the night air. She paused at the car door, reality settling heavy on her shoulders. This morning she'd been a simple librarian. Now she stood on the precipice of something vast and dangerous, with a man who dealt in violence and spoke of children like foregone conclusions. "Your hour starts when we arrive," Ronan said quietly, holding the door. "Not a minute before." Grace slid into the leather interior, the city lights painting patterns across her face. As Ronan settled across from her, she noticed his watch. A subtle Patek Philippe that probably cost more than she made in a year. Everything about him spoke of precision and control, from his perfectly knotted tie to his carefully maintained distance. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying them toward whatever neutral ground a man like Ronan Vexley considered suitable for proposing arranged marriage and prophesied twins. Grace watched the hospital shrink in the rear window, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or if that mistake had been made for her long ago when Ronan first decided to pay those medical bills. The SUV glided through Chicago's empty streets, its tinted windows reflecting neon signs and streetlights. Grace sat rigidly in the leather seat, watching Ronan check his phone with practiced efficiency. The clock on the dashboard blinked 11:53 p.m. 2 minutes, he said, as they pulled up to a modern glass tower. Security personnel materialized from shadow, sweeping the perimeter before nodding to Ronan. The elevator whispered upward, carrying them to a rooftop terrace that stretched beneath the stars. Medical equipment gleamed through floor-to-ceiling windows of what appeared to be a private clinic suite. Grace inhaled sharply as Ronan directed the guards to prop open the terrace doors, letting in a rush of cold night air. "You said you needed to breathe," he explained, gesturing to a glass table where 2 documents lay waiting. "These require your attention." Grace approached cautiously. The first contract radiated menace, terms for aggressive debt collection that would destroy her life in her aunt's care. The second offered salvation, marriage, complete coverage of medical expenses, and a scholarship fund in her name. Both contained explicit language about consent and physical boundaries. "You won't touch me without permission," she read aloud, surprised. "Correct." Ronan stood with military stillness. "Every interaction will be your choice." Grace's analytical mind kicked in, searching for traps. "I want changes." "Name them." "I keep medical power of attorney for my aunt." "Done." "My remote cataloging job continues." "Naturally." "You knock before entering my suite." "Always." "And I can stop any intimate activity at any point." "Without question or consequence." His immediate acceptance of each term unsettled her more than resistance would have. She studied his face, searching for deception, but found only that same winter-calm certainty. The city hummed below as Grace paced, mind racing. Medical bills scrolled through her thoughts. Past, present, future. Her aunt's fragile breathing in the ICU. The weight of years spent drowning in debt. "Why me?" she finally asked. "Because you'll give me twins by winter," he replied simply, as if reading tomorrow's weather. The clock crept past midnight, then 12:20, while Grace negotiated smaller details, her schedule, security protocols, communication, methods. Ronan answered each question with precise clarity, never rushing her. At 12:40, his phone buzzed. "The doctor needs you nearby in case of medication authorizations," he said. "I have a guest suite prepared." Grace's exhaustion hit suddenly, the day's stress catching up. She followed him down to a private floor of his residence, noting cameras in the hallways and emergency exits. "No locked doors," Ronan assured her, placing his phone face up on a marble console. "Complete transparency. The security feed displays here, and my location tracker is active." He opened double doors to reveal a suite that made Grace's breath catch. Bookshelves lined the walls, creating a cozy reading nook with a leather armchair. Through an archway, she glimpsed a salon where a glossy grand piano commanded the space. "It arrived this evening," Ronan explained, following her gaze to the piano. "A librarian should have a library, even here." Grace's fingers trailed along the book's spines. First editions, rare volumes, contemporary fiction. The collection showed thought, not just expense. She turned to find Ronan watching her with that same unsettling focus. "I'll leave you to rest," he said. "Security will note my departure from this floor. I won't return until hospital rounds at 6 a.m. The doors closed with a soft click. Grace explored further. A marble bathroom with heated floors, a kitchen stocked with her favorite tea. How did he know? A bedroom she wouldn't use tonight. She returned to the sofa, keeping her shoes on, listening to the city's muted pulse through thick windows. A gentle chime announced Ronan's elevator departure. Grace curled deeper into the sofa, mind whirling with the day's revelations. Just that morning, she'd been organizing medieval manuscripts. Now she lay in a mafia boss's guest suite, considering a marriage contract that read more like a military alliance. The piano gleamed in the dim light, its presence both thoughtful and calculating. Like everything about Ronan, the careful distance, the immediate acceptance of her terms, the way he'd orchestrated this entire scenario while letting her believe she had choices. Did she have choices? The contract's contents flickered through her memory. One path led to destruction, the other to a gilded cage, albeit one with surprisingly reasonable terms. Her aunt's face floated in her thoughts, pale against hospital sheets. The city lights painted patterns on the ceiling as Grace drifted into uneasy sleep. Still fully dressed, her last conscious thought lingering on Ronan's absolute certainty about those twins. Not a threat, not a request. A simple statement of fact, as if he'd already seen their future written in stone. A clock somewhere chimed one. Security cameras blinked steadily in corners. Somewhere 50 floors below, Chicago continued its nighttime rhythm, unaware that in this tower, a librarian's life had just tilted on its axis. Grace slipped deeper into exhaustion, her breathing finally evening out as the weight of the day pulled her under. A soft knock at 6:05 a.m. pulled Grace from her restless sleep on the sofa. She blinked, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling and the city's pale morning light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Ms. Whitlow?" A man's voice, steady and professional. "It's Finn Calder, Mr. Vexley's head of security." Grace smoothed her rumpled clothes, grateful she'd kept them on. "Come in." Finn entered with quiet efficiency, carrying a tray with oatmeal and coffee. His movements were precise, almost military, as he set it on the coffee table. Despite his imposing height, he maintained a careful distance. "Your aunt stabilized at 3:10 a.m., he reported. "They've scheduled additional tests for 9 a.m. before the afternoon procedure. The morning staff confirmed all vitals are holding steady." Grace released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you." Another knock echoed through the suite. Finn straightened, automatically positioning himself between Grace and the door. "May I enter?" Ronan's voice carried that same winter calm from last night. "Yes." Grace sat up straighter, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee mug. Ronan stepped in, impeccable in a charcoal suit despite the early hour. He chose the armchair furthest from her, giving her space. "The marriage contract serves multiple purposes," he began, without preamble. "Beyond securing your aunt's care, it makes you legally off limits to rival families who monitor my financial movements. They've already noted the trust payments." Grace's fingers tightened on the mug. "Are you saying I'm in danger?" "You're a potential pressure point they might exploit. Marriage places you firmly under my protection." His gray eyes held hers. "But I want to be clear. You choose if and when our union becomes physical. That power remains entirely yours." "Then let me be equally clear." Grace set down her coffee. "I won't be coerced into intimacy. Any future physical relationship will be my choice, my initiative." Ronan nodded once, accepting her terms without argument. "I propose a legal ceremony at noon in my private chapel. A judge will officiate, and I've arranged for 3 female attorneys to be available via video call. You can choose one to review the terms with you privately." Grace's analytical mind kicked in, weighing options. "Show me the lawyer's credentials." He passed her a tablet with 3 profiles displayed. Grace spent the next hour on a secure video call with Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed attorney who specialized in high-stakes marriage contracts. The lawyer methodically highlighted every clause, potential loophole, and protection built into the agreement. By 8:20 a.m., Grace had made her decision. "I agree to the paper marriage," she stated firmly, "solely to protect my aunt and resolve the debt." "Understood." Ronan's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, for her. Directness. The morning passed in a blur of preparations. Grace showered and changed into a simple gray dress provided by an efficient assistant. She braided her hair back, applied minimal makeup, and tried to steady her racing thoughts. At 11:55 a.m., the judge arrived, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. The private chapel was small, elegant, with pale morning light streaming through stained glass. Finn stood as witness, his presence oddly reassuring. The vows were minimal, focused on legal requirements rather than sentiment. The rings were simple platinum bands, selected for practicality rather than romance. When the judge pronounced them married, Ronan's kiss was barely a brush of lips, lasting exactly one heartbeat before Grace stepped back. He immediately respected the distance she created, making no move to close it again. By 1 p.m., they were in the car heading to the hospital. Grace sat by the window, mentally reviewing her aunt's medication list like a mantra. Anticoagulants at 2 p.m., pain management at 4 p.m., antibiotics at 6 p.m. Ronan worked quietly on his phone, coordinating with hospital security. His voice was low as he arranged additional protection for the ICU floor. "Grace!" His tone made her look up as they approached the hospital's private entrance. "There will be men outside who don't belong to me. Stay between me and the curb." She nodded, tucking her phone into her pocket. The simple band on her left hand caught the fluorescent light as they stepped into the sterile corridor together. Grace noticed how Ronan positioned himself slightly ahead of her, angling his body to shield her from the main entrance's sightlines. Finn materialized behind them, completing a protective triangle that felt more tactical than coincidental. Medical staff hurried past, too busy to notice how Ronan's hand hovered near Grace's elbow without touching it, or how Finn's eyes continuously scanned their surroundings. To anyone watching, they might have looked like any other family visiting a patient. If they missed the coiled tension in Ronan's shoulders, the way Finn checked corners before they turned them, the calculated spacing that kept Grace in the safest position. The ICU's automatic doors whooshed open. Grace focused on the steady beep of monitors, the familiar hospital scents, the practiced movements of nurses checking vitals. These were constants she understood, unlike the new complexities of her life: a marriage certificate signed in morning light, a ring that felt foreign on her finger, and two dangerous men now tasked with her protection. Her aunt's room was just ahead, and Grace straightened her spine, preparing to be strong for the woman who had raised her. Whatever consequences came with her decision, she would face them. For now, she had secured her aunt's care and established her own boundaries. The rest would have to wait. Grace's pen hovered over the consent form, her new wedding band catching. The fluorescent light. The ICU corridor hummed with activity as she added her signature to the addendum authorizing her aunt's afternoon procedure. An orderly paused nearby, his gaze lingering too long on her ring finger before he stepped away, phone already in hand. Ronan noticed. He always noticed. His expression didn't change, but his shoulders tensed as he touched his earpiece. Finn materialized at his side, voice low and urgent. "Unmarked vehicles, boss. 3 loops in 5 minutes. "Grace!" Ronan's tone was calm but brooked no argument. "We're taking a different exit." He guided her toward a service elevator, his movements precise and unhurried, despite the urgency in his eyes. The steel doors had barely closed when the first shots cracked through the parking bay windows. Grace flinched at the sound of shattering glass. Ronan's body moved instantly, shielding her as they emerged into the underground level. His breath was steady against her hair as more shots echoed across concrete. "Stay close! Don't run unless I tell you!" A black sedan squealed around the corner, Finn at the wheel. Ronan kept Grace covered as they moved, his larger frame absorbing any potential threat. The car door opened, and she was inside in seconds, Ronan sliding in beside her as Finn accelerated through the exit. Sirens wailed in their wake. Grace's hands trembled in her lap as they sped toward Ronan's private garage, adrenaline making her pulse thunder in her ears. She caught fragments of conversation between the men. Carpin's crew and perimeter breach and hospital compromise. The garage was a fortress of steel and concrete. As the car stopped, Grace's legs felt wooden. Ronan didn't touch her, but he stayed close as she stepped out, guiding her to a quiet corner where she could breathe. He handed her a bottle of water, giving her space while she processed. "Someone leaked information about you," he said finally, voice controlled but angry. "Yakov Karpin now knows I have a wife. He'll use that." Grace's hands tightened around the water bottle. "My aunt is in surgery for another 3 hours. The floor is secure, but the hospital itself is vulnerable." Ronan watched her carefully. "You understand what this means?" She did. With sickening clarity, she understood. There was no going back to her apartment, no pretending this marriage was just paperwork. To keep her aunt safe, to keep the hospital from becoming a war zone, she needed to accept Ronan's protection completely. "I'll stay in the secure suite," she said quietly. "But my terms about physical intimacy stand. Always." The single word carried the weight of an oath. The hours crawled by. Grace paced in her new quarters while Ronan coordinated security and Finn vetted hospital staff. At 6:30 p.m., word came that the surgery had succeeded. By 7:15, Grace was back at the ICU, 2 guards outside and 2 more in adjacent corridors. Her aunt looked small in the hospital bed, peaceful under sedation. Grace had 10 minutes to hold her hand and whisper reassurances before the nurses needed to check vitals. 10 minutes to pretend everything was normal, that she hadn't married a crime boss, that men hadn't tried to kill her that afternoon. Back at Ronan's residence by 7:40 p.m., Grace stood at the window of her suite. Below, ambulance lights traced red patterns through the gathering dark. She heard Ronan in the hallway, giving quiet orders to increase the ICU guard rotation through the night. Her reflection stared back at her, pale but composed. The woman in the glass looked the same as she had yesterday, but everything had changed. The simple ring on her finger caught the city lights, a constant reminder of choices made and paths chosen. The hospital glowed in the distance, a beacon of white and red against the night sky. Grace watched another ambulance wind its way through traffic, its siren a faint wail through the thick glass. Somewhere in that building, her aunt slept, healing and vulnerable. Somewhere in the streets below, Carpin's men were probably still watching, waiting. She sensed more than heard Ronan pass her door, his footsteps nearly silent on the carpet. He didn't intrude, didn't try to offer comfort or demands. The distance he maintained was exactly what she'd requested, yet somehow his silent presence was its own kind of protection. Grace pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching her breath fog the window. The city stretched out before her, a maze of lights and shadows, safety and danger intertwined. In less than 24 hours, she'd become a wife, a target, and a protected asset. But she was still herself, still the woman who negotiated terms, who chose her battles, who would do anything to keep her aunt safe. The night settled around her like a heavy cloak. Beyond her window, security teams moved in precise patterns through the hospital corridors. Ronan's men took their positions, a web of protection spreading out from her aunt's room. Grace remained at her post by the glass, a silent guardian watching over the city that had become both refuge and battlefield. Her phone buzzed with a message from the night nurse. Vital stable, everything proceeding as expected. Grace sent back a brief acknowledgement, her fingers steady now despite the day's chaos. In the glass, her reflection straightened its shoulders, lifted its chin. She may not have chosen this path, but she would walk it on her own terms, one careful step at a time. The morning sun filtered through stained glass, casting jeweled light across the chapel hall's polished floors. At 8 sharp, Grace entered a reception that looked more like a Renaissance painting than a modern breakfast. White lilies spilled from crystal vases, their perfume mixing with the scent of fresh pastries and coffee. A string quartet played Bach in the corner, their bows moving in perfect synchronization. Security personnel lined the walls like dark statues, their earpieces glinting. Finn stood near the main entrance, his stance relaxed, but his eyes constantly scanning. The small gathering of witnesses, carefully vetted business associates and necessary legal parties, maintained a respectful distance from the newlyweds. The priest stepped forward, his traditional blessing carrying undertones that made Grace's spine stiffen. "May God protect this union," he intoned, "and shield it from those who would seek to destroy what he has joined." The words hung in the air like smoke, more threat than prayer. Ronan's hand brushed her elbow, and he leaned close. His breath was warm against her ear as he whispered, "The world will die before it touches you." To the watching crowd, it looked like an intimate moment between lovers. Grace alone heard the steel beneath the velvet, understanding it wasn't about control, it was a promise written in blood. After the formalities, Ronan led her to a side anteroom. The space was intimate, with dark wood paneling and a single window. He presented her with a velvet box, and Grace's breath caught when she opened it. Inside lay an elegant knife, its handle inlaid with mother of pearl. "First lesson," he said, demonstrating a basic grip. His hands remained professional as he adjusted her fingers on the handle, showing her how to turn her wrist in a clean defensive motion. "Again," he instructed, and Grace repeated the movement until it felt natural. The late morning found Grace in her suite, settled at a sleek desk with a laptop. She immersed herself in the familiar comfort of her remote cataloging work. Ancient texts and digital archives waiting to be organized. The routine helped ground her in normality, even as Finn moved through the room, outlining security protocols. "Main exits here and here," he indicated on a tablet. "Panic room code changes daily. It'll be texted to your secure phone each morning." His voice remained steady, making it sound as routine as checking the weather. "The staff's been vetted, but still maintain awareness. Trust your instincts. At 2 o'clock, Grace's video call connected to her aunt's hospital room. The older woman's face lit up the screen, pale but smiling, her eyes fixed immediately on Grace's ring. "So secretive," her aunt teased, while Grace's heart clenched. "A whirlwind romance, and you didn't breathe a word?" Grace forced a light laugh, hating the lie, but knowing it kept her aunt safe. "It's a work assignment," she said smoothly. "Everything's fine. I'm perfectly safe." The truth hidden in those words helped ease the guilt. The afternoon stretched into evening. At 5, Grace found herself drawn to the residence's library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held leather-bound volumes, their spines creating a tapestry of rich colors. The piano stood in pride of place near tall windows, its black surface gleaming. Her fingers hovered over the keys, remembering how she'd looked at them longingly the night before. A soft step announced Ronan's presence. "I saw how you watched it," he said, remaining in the doorway. "Your eyes followed the keys like you were playing in your mind." Grace turned, surprised by this observation. "You had it placed here last night?" "This morning. A librarian should have music with her books." He didn't move closer, respecting the space she required. The evening settled into quiet routine. Grace retired to her room at 10, the bedside lamp casting a warm glow as she opened a leather journal. Her pen moved across the page, recording her non-negotiables. Consent remaining firmly in her control, her work continuing without interference, her aunt's safety and care guaranteed. Through the window, she could see the city lights sparkling like scattered diamonds. The security feed on her tablet showed Ronan departing for the port, his figure straight-backed and purposeful as he entered a waiting car. Grace changed into silk pajamas. They had appeared in her closet, tags still attached, in exactly her size. The bed was cloud-soft when she slipped between the sheets, leaving the lamp burning. She noted, as sleep began to blur the edges of consciousness, that Ronan hadn't once attempted to enter her room without permission. Her last thoughts before drifting off were of the day's contrasts. The deadly grace of knife training alongside Bach quartets, security protocols mixed with library books, lies wrapped in truths to protect those she loved. The lamp's glow held back the darkness, a small comfort in a world that had become infinitely more complex. The night settled around her like a protective cloak. Somewhere in the city, Ronan conducted business at the port. In her room, Grace slept, the journal open beside her, its pages filled with the boundaries she'd drawn. The marriage might have been arranged, but her terms were her own, written in ink, sealed with determination, and respected by the man who now called her wife. Dawn crept over the city as Grace stepped onto the balcony, the morning air crisp against her skin. Steam rose from 2 coffee cups on the glass table where Ronan waited, a leather folder placed between them. He wore a charcoal suit that matched the early morning shadows, his presence both commanding and carefully distant. "House rules," he said, sliding the folder toward her. "You'll want to review them." Grace settled into the chair opposite him, maintaining the space that had become their normal. The first page listed clear terms in precise typeface. She read each line carefully, her coffee cooling beside her. "You knock before entering any of my spaces," she read aloud, nodding. "My job continues under protected networks. Hospital visits follow rotating schedules." She paused, studying the security protocols for visiting her aunt. "Any concerns?" Ronan's voice was neutral, professional. "The physical boundaries are clear," Grace noted, reaching the section about intimate contact. "Explicit invitation required, revocable at any time. Non-negotiable," he confirmed. "Your comfort is paramount." Grace uncapped a pen, adding her own annotation in the margin. "One addition. For extended absences, I need check-ins with Finn. I won't be left wondering if something's wrong." Ronan studied her addition, then nodded. "Agreed. Information is security." The morning merged into afternoon, sun climbing higher as Grace familiarized herself with the residence's layout. She found herself near Ronan's office, the door ajar. A whiteboard covered one wall filled with port numbers and shipping schedules. Her librarian's eye for patterns caught something odd. "These container numbers," she said, not realizing Ronan had entered behind her. "The scheduling creates a bottleneck next Tuesday." He moved to stand beside her, maintaining their usual careful distance. "Show me." Grace approached the board, running calculations in her head. "If you shift these 2 shipments by 6 hours, accounting for tide patterns." Her finger traced the numbers, revealing a pattern hidden in plain sight. Ronan watched her work, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. "I missed that," he admitted, studying her calculations with new respect. The afternoon light was softening when Finn appeared in the doorway, supporting a small figure under his arm. The boy couldn't have been more than 12, his clothes torn, face bearing fresh bruises. He'd been found near one of Carpen's pickup sites. Grace watched, frozen, as Ronan's entire demeanor transformed. He knelt before the boy, movements slow and gentle. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his expensive suit jacket and wrapped it around the child's trembling shoulders. "You're safe now," Ronan said softly, his voice carrying a warmth Grace hadn't heard before. "Let's get you looked at." The moment struck her deeply. This glimpse of tenderness from a man who commanded fear in the streets. She watched as he personally ensured the boy was fed and examined by a doctor, his attention unwavering until the child was settled in a secure room. Evening settled over the city like a velvet cloak. Grace found herself drawn to the piano, her fingers moving through familiar scales. The melody helped order her thoughts about the day's revelations, the careful boundaries, the hidden patterns, the unexpected gentleness. A door clicked shut somewhere in the residence. Through the window, she watched Ronan's car pull away toward the docks. He was testing her theory about the shipping schedules, she realized. The night deepened. Grace moved through the quiet rooms, adding books to her growing collection in the library, organizing files for tomorrow's remote work. Just before midnight, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Ronan stood at her door, knuckles raw and spotted with blood, but his expression carried satisfaction. "Your calculations were correct," he said. "Saved us from losing a route to Carpen's men." Grace studied his hands, noting how he kept them slightly behind his back, trying to shield her from the violence they delivered, but she'd already seen the gentleness those same hands could offer to a frightened child. "Thank you," she said, "for knocking." He inclined his head, a gesture of respect, then retreated down the corridor without attempting to cross her threshold. Grace closed her door, processing the complexities of the man who was now her husband. He was capable of both calculating violence and surprising tenderness, yet he honored every boundary she set. He could command an empire through fear, but knelt to comfort a street child. The city lights painted patterns on her ceiling as she prepared for bed. Today had revealed layers to their arrangement she hadn't expected. His willingness to incorporate her suggestions into house rules, his recognition of her skills with the shipping patterns, the way he balanced power with respect. She thought about the boy, safe now because of both Ronan's protection and his humanity. The same hands that had drawn blood tonight had offered comfort hours before. It was a study in contrast that defied simple categorization. The night settled into familiar sounds, security patrols, distant sirens, the hum of a city that never truly slept. Grace's world had expanded beyond the library's quiet shelves into something more complex, more dangerous, but also more intriguing than she'd imagined. Her laptop glowed softly as she logged tomorrow's cataloging tasks. Outside her door, she heard the quiet movements of the night security rotation. Somewhere in the building, a boy slept safely because of the man who had given her both strict boundaries and the power to define them. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Grace studied the whiteboard, markers scattered across the conference table. Ronan stood with his arms crossed, flanked by Finn and two lieutenants she knew only as Martinez and Chen. The air was thick with tension over a scheduling conflict that threatened to bottleneck 3 major shipments. "If we push the Kong line to Thursday," Martinez began. "Thursday puts us against the Coast Guard rotation," Finn cut in, shaking his head. Grace uncapped a blue marker, her hand steady, as she began drawing. "What if we think about this differently?" She sketched out lanes, adding timestamps and tide patterns. The men fell silent, watching as she created a new diagram that spread across the pristine white surface. "See here?" She tapped the marker against an intersection point. "By splitting the Kong shipment and realigning with the tides, we create a natural buffer zone. No Coast Guard, no bottleneck." Ronan moved closer, studying her work. His expression shifted from scrutiny to approval. "It works," he said simply, but his tone carried weight. The lieutenants exchanged glances, surprise mingled with respect. After the meeting dispersed, the apartment settled into an unusual quiet. Grace was organizing files when piano notes drifted through the corridor, something melancholic and raw. She followed the sound, pausing in the doorway of the music room. Ronan sat at the piano, his scarred hands moving across the keys with unexpected grace. The piece was spare, haunting, filled with spaces between notes that spoke of absence, of loneliness. She recognized the emotion in every aching chord. He sensed her presence but didn't stop playing. "My first clear memory," he said, voice low. is of concrete floors and number assignments instead of names. Ward 17B, that was me, until I wasn't. His fingers continued their dance across the keys. You learn quickly in state care. Either become colder than the world that abandoned you, or let it destroy you. I chose ice. A minor chord resonated. Built the Vexley name from nothing. Became someone no one could touch. Grace moved closer, drawn by the raw honesty in his words. A scar curved along his right wrist, pale against tanned skin. Without thinking, she reached out, fingertips brushing the raised tissue. Ronan's breath caught. The music stopped. For one suspended moment, they existed in perfect stillness. Then he stood, putting careful distance between them. The lines stay clear, he said quietly, until you choose to blur them. Not before. The afternoon brought a hospital visit, Grace's heels clicking against sterile floors as guards flanked her path to her aunt's room. For an hour, she read aloud from a dog-eared mystery novel, pretending everything was normal while armed men stood watch outside. Returning to the apartment, she found a surprise waiting in her suite. A sleek box contained pristine archival gloves, the expensive kind she'd only dreamed of using at the library. Beside it sat a stack of rare book catalogs, first editions, illuminated manuscripts, volumes that made her heart race. Ronan's thoughtfulness revealed itself in the details. Evening settled over the city, bringing with it a storm that turned buildings into fractured mirrors. Thunder rolled between skyscrapers as rain lashed against windows. Grace sat at her desk, watching lightning split the sky, thinking about the man who had built an empire from nothing but refused to cross the boundaries he'd given her. Taking a piece of paper, she wrote 2 simple words. I see you. Not the feared boss, not the nameless ward, but the complexity of who he was beneath the armor. She slid the note under his door and returned to her room as thunder shook the building. At 11:30 p.m., Ronan found the note. His fingers traced the words before he carefully folded the paper and tucked it into his wallet. Moving to the security console, he doubled the guard on her floor while the storm raged outside. Standing at his window, he watched lightning illuminate the city in stuttering frames. The note in his wallet carried more weight than any contract. She saw past the name he'd built, past the violence and power, to something he thought he'd buried under layers of ice, something that still ached like the piano piece he'd played. In her own room, Grace listened to the storm and the steady footsteps of guards in the corridor. The rare book catalogs lay open on her desk, promising worlds of knowledge and beauty. Outside her window, rain transformed the city into rivers of light, while inside, the boundaries between them remained clear, but somehow less cold. The storm continued its assault on the city, but within the apartment's walls, something had shifted. Not in crossed lines or broken rules, but in understanding, in recognition, in the space between notes and a lonely piano piece and words written in the dark. Grace thought about the scar she'd touched, the story it told of survival and transformation, of a nameless boy who built himself into a king but still carried wounds under his carefully constructed armor. She understood now why he gave her such clear boundaries. He was protecting them both from the weight of their circumstances. Thunder rattled the windows as midnight approached. In separate rooms, they listened to the storm reshape the city, each holding their own version of truth. His in a folded note that proved someone finally saw him, hers in the understanding that power and gentleness could coexist in the same scarred hands. Thunder cracked against steel-gray clouds at 6 a.m., the storm showing no signs of retreat. Rain hammered against windows while Grace watched lightning illuminate the city in harsh bursts. She'd barely slept, the weather too violent for rest. At 7:10 a.m., everything changed. Finn burst through the door, phone pressed to his ear. Boss, warehouse 7. His voice was tight. Explosion. Ronan materialized from his office, already shrugging on a coat. Residential exposure. 3 blocks, mixed housing. Clear them, all of them. Ronan's orders came rapid fire as he checked his weapon. Start evacuation, 4-block radius. Get fire control rolling. I want those people out before the secondary tanks go. Grace followed them to the elevator. I'm coming. No. Ronan's voice cut like steel. Yes. She matched his tone. I can help coordinate with emergency services. I'm good with systems. A muscle ticked in his jaw, but he nodded once. You stay in the convoy car. Armed guard, no arguments. The drive was tense, wipers fighting sheets of rain. Through water-streaked windows, Grace saw orange flames reflecting off low clouds. Black smoke twisted skyward despite the downpour. By 8 a.m., they reached the scene. Fire crews battled the inferno while police redirected traffic. Ronan moved with lethal grace, issuing commands that sent men running. Grace watched from the car as he coordinated with fire chiefs, pointing out structural weaknesses and gas line locations. A second explosion rocked the ground. Through the smoke, Ronan spotted something that made him break into a run, a gas main that could trigger a chain reaction. He sprinted for the cutoff valve, Finn covering his back. Two figures emerged from the chaos, weapons drawn. Grace's breath caught as she watched Ronan move. It wasn't fighting, it was execution, clinical, precise. In seconds, both attackers lay still, and Ronan reached the valve. The violence shocked her. She'd known what he was, but seeing it was different. His efficiency was terrifying. Trained muscle memory that ended lives without hesitation. Yet those same hands had just saved an entire block of families. Fire crews gained control by 11 a.m. The rain helped, finally working in their favor. But victory came at a cost. 3 of Ronan's men hadn't made it out. Grace watched him kneel beside each body, speaking quietly to Finn, who took notes with a grim expression. The ride home was silent. Ronan's shirt was soaked with rain and smoke, hands scraped from the valve wheel. Grace couldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline crash hit hard, leaving her hollow. Back at the apartment, she stumbled to her room. The morning felt surreal, the explosion, the deaths, Ronan's brutal efficiency. Her hands trembled as she tried to unbutton her coat. A soft knock. Ronan stood in the doorway, keeping his promise to never enter uninvited. His hands were open at his sides, a deliberate choice to appear non-threatening. "What do you need?" Grace looked at him, really looked. Beneath the smoke and violence was exhaustion, and something else. Concern. For her. "Stay," she whispered. "While I sleep, please." He nodded once and settled into the chair by her bed, boots still on, angled toward the door, ready, watching. Grace curled under her blankets, still fully dressed. The trembling slowly eased as rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows. Ronan's presence anchored her, solid and vigilant. His breathing was steady, measured, a counterpoint to the storm. She drifted, knowing he would guard her sleep. The man who could end lives in seconds now sat sentinel, protecting her rest. The contradiction should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like safety. Hours passed in gray light and falling rain. When Grace woke at 7 p.m., Ronan hadn't moved, still alert, still watching. She met his eyes and nodded, their silent language of consent and boundaries. "Thank you," she said quietly, regarding the night. He stood, rolling tension from his shoulders. Always. Then he was gone, heading to debrief with his captains about the men they'd lost. Grace sat in the growing darkness, processing the day's events. She'd seen both sides of him now, the deadly efficiency and the careful protector. The man who would kill without hesitation and the one who sat for hours, watching over her sleep. The rain had finally stopped. Through her window, emergency lights still pulsed in the distance, marking the warehouse site. Somewhere in the city, 3 families were learning about losses. Grace thought about Ronan kneeling beside his fallen men, showing respect even in death. She touched the spot on her chair where he'd sat. Guard, still slightly warm. The room felt different now, marked by those hours of silent vigilance, by trust given and kept, by the weight of seeing someone's full truth and choosing to stay. The city lights began to flicker on, creating constellations in the wet darkness. Somewhere below, Ronan was with his captains, handling the aftermath of violence and loss, but for those protected hours, he'd set aside the role of feared boss to simply watch over her sleep. It was a gift she hadn't expected, this glimpse of gentleness behind the necessary brutality. Grace moved to her window, watching the city rebuild itself after the storm. The day had changed something between them, though the lines remained clear. She'd seen him at his most lethal and his most protective. Both were equally true. Both were essential parts of survival in his world. In the distance, sirens wailed, a reminder that danger never truly slept. But here, in this room still holding the echo of his vigil, Grace found she wasn't afraid. Not of him, not anymore. The storm intensified as night settled over the city. At 9 p.m., a tremendous crack of thunder preceded total darkness. The residence's power failed, plunging everything into shadow. Emergency lights sputtered to life, casting eerie blue patterns on the walls. Grace's heart leaped into her throat. After the day's violence, darkness felt too close, too threatening. "Ronan?" Her voice carried down the hallway. "I'm here!" His response came immediately, steady and calm. "Outside your door. Do you want me to come in?" She wrapped her arms around herself, watching lightning illuminate the rain-streaked windows. "Yes." He appeared in the doorway, a solid presence against the flickering emergency lights. Water still dripped from his shower-damp hair, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. Human, not the deadly force she'd witnessed hours before. Grace moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. The air felt charged, heavy with possibility. "I want to ask you something. Anything." His voice was soft, careful. "Kiss me." She met his eyes in the blue-tinted darkness. "Not because of contracts or obligations. Kiss me because I'm choosing this, because I'm choosing you." He went very still. "Grace." Her name sounded like a prayer. "Be certain, this isn't about debt." "I'm certain." She stepped closer. "This is my choice. Yes." Still, he waited, searching her face. "Tell me once more. I need to hear it." "Yes." The word was barely a whisper, but it carried absolute conviction. "Yes, Ronan." Only then did he move, cradling her face in his scarred hands as if she were something precious. The first touch of his lips was achingly gentle, reverent, testing. When she pressed closer, the kiss deepened, hungry yet still careful. Thunder rolled outside as they moved together. His hands trembled slightly against her skin, the feared boss undone by tenderness. Each new touch came with a question in his eyes, waiting for her nod. Her whispered, "Yes." The windows hummed with wind as clothing fell away. Every step was her choice, every moment of intimacy requested and granted. He worshipped her with the same intensity he brought to everything, but this was different. This was surrender rather than control. Rain pounded against glass while they learned each other. His scars told stories under her fingers. Old wounds, survival marked in silver lines across muscle. She traced each one, claiming them as he shuddered and whispered her name. Their breathing synchronized, hearts finding the same rhythm. When power finally returned, stuttering to life, the soft glow caught the sheen of sweat on skin, the tangle of sheets, the way they fit together, like missing pieces finally found. At 2 a.m., Ronan tucked the duvet carefully around her shoulders. Grace was already drifting, pleasure-drunk and peaceful. His hand settled over her heart, protective and possessive at once. She covered it with her own, threading their fingers together. The storm gradually gentled to steady rain. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the city rebuild itself after the blackout. Sirens Dopplered past, but they felt distant, unimportant. Here in this room, there was only warmth and connection. Grace studied his face in the dim light. The hard lines had softened, armor set aside. She saw echoes of the lonely boy who'd built himself into something powerful, who'd learned to be colder than the world that abandoned him. But here, now, that coldness had melted. Dawn arrived in gradual gray light around 5:30 a.m., painting everything in gentle silver. Ronan looked younger in the growing brightness, more open than she'd ever seen him. When he smiled, a real smile, unguarded and warm, it transformed his entire face. "I'll get breakfast," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. Grace caught his hand before he could move away. "Come back." "Always." The word held weight, a vow beyond the moment. The city spread out below their windows, waking to rain-washed morning. But in this room, time felt suspended. They had created something new in the darkness, something chosen, not compelled, something real. Ronan's thumb traced circles on her wrist, counting her pulse like a blessing. Every touch said what words couldn't yet, that this night had changed everything, that walls had fallen, that choice was more powerful than coercion. Grace watched the play of early light across his features, memorizing the softer version of him. The feared boss was still there. She'd seen his lethal capability mere hours ago. But now she knew the man beneath the armor, the one who asked permission and waited for yes, who touched her like she was precious and smiled in the dawn. They had started with contracts and conditions, with careful lines and boundaries. Now those lines had blurred by choice, redrawn by trust rather than obligation. What began as protection had grown into something neither expected, but both needed. Outside, the city shook off the storm's remnants. Traffic resumed its steady rhythm. People emerged to assess damage. Life continued its forward motion. But here in this room, Grace and Ronan existed in their own pocket of time, marked by gentle touches and unspoken understanding. The gray light strengthened, painting everything in pearl and silver. It caught the ring on Grace's finger. No longer a symbol of arrangement, but something chosen. Something earned through patience and respect, through seeing each other's truths and staying anyway. She watched him rise, already missing his warmth, but his smile held promises. Of return, of continuation, of more mornings like this, of a future built on choice rather than necessity. "Come back," she'd said, and his were always still hung in the air between them. A new vow, freely given, the start of something real. Morning light streamed through the kitchen windows as Grace watched Ronan wrestle with pastry dough, flour dusting his usually immaculate shirt. The sight was almost comical, the feared Mafia boss frowning at a misshapen croissant. "You're mangling it," she said, hiding a smile behind her coffee cup. "I excel at many things. This isn't one of them." He looked so genuinely annoyed at the dough that she laughed. "Here." Grace moved behind him, guiding his hands through the proper folding motion. "Like this." The domesticity of the moment struck her. How natural it felt to stand close, to touch without hesitation. Last night had changed things between them, transformed their careful arrangement into something real. Their peaceful morning shattered at 9:12 a.m. Finn's knock was sharp, urgent. He entered with a thick manila folder, his expression grim. "Boss, you need to see these." The photographs spilled across the counter like accusations. Grace's breath caught as she processed what she was seeing. Ronan with other women, all of them looking lost and desperate. Hospital bills, debt notices. The dates were recent. "These are doctored," Ronan said immediately, his voice hard. "Old photos made to look new." But it was the audio file that made Grace's stomach turn to ice. Greta Voss's cultured voice emerged from Finn's phone, crystal clear. "The girl is the lever. Everything is proceeding as planned." Grace stared at the evidence, mind racing, her aunt's medical bills, the perfectly timed courier, the way Ronan appeared exactly when she was most vulnerable. "I won't deny I've used similar tactics," Ronan said carefully. "Years ago, with an enemy's widow. But not with you. Never with you." Grace stepped back, needing space to think. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too confining. "I need time." Ronan pulled out his keyring and removed a single key. "Private elevator to the garage. Take whatever time you need." She grabbed her coat and bag, the key cold in her palm. The elevator descended smoothly, giving her a moment to breathe, to plan. By 10 a.m., she was in a car heading to the hospital. She had to get her aunt somewhere safe, somewhere outside the web of debts and power plays. Her hands shook as she signed the transfer papers for tomorrow morning. The hospital corridors felt endless as she walked toward the side exit at 10:50 a.m. Her mind raced with logistics, new facility arrangements, transport details, security concerns. She never saw the van coming. The door slid open with a harsh scrape. Hands grabbed her, yanking her inside. Grace fought back with the knife grip Ronan had taught her. Thumb here, wrist turned, just so. But there were too many of them. Something sharp pressed against her neck. "Be still," a voice ordered. The van smelled of cigarettes and gun oil. Grace forced herself to breathe slowly, to think past the fear. Count the men. Note the turns. Stay alert. They drove for 20 minutes, crossing the river. The winter garden was a shell of its former glory. Shattered glass panels, dead vines, frozen fountains. Grace recognized Yakov Karpin from security briefings. Tall, scarred, eyes like empty wells. "Comfortable?" He gestured to a metal chair, positioned precisely in front of several cameras. "We have much to discuss." Grace studied the frost patterns on the ivy while they set up their equipment. The cold air bit through her coat, but she welcomed it. Cold meant clear thoughts. Clear thoughts meant survival. She noted details mechanically. 3 cameras, 5 men, 2 exits. The garden's skeletal architecture created odd acoustics. Voices echoed strangely off the glass. Patches of ice made the floor treacherous. Karpin moved with theatrical precision, arranging lights, checking angles. A performance, then. This was about more than just her. "You'll be our guest for a while," he said, almost pleasant. "How long depends on your husband's cooperation." Grace kept her breathing even, her expression neutral. She thought of Ronan teaching her the knife grip, patient and careful. Of his hands gentle on her face last night. Of the way he'd given her the elevator key without hesitation, respecting her need for space, even when it hurt him. The photographs felt like poison in her mind. But she remembered other things, too. Ronan wrapping his coat around a street kid, playing lonely music in the dark, asking permission before every touch. Karpin's men finished their setup, the camera's red lights blinking steadily. Grace tracked their movements, noting who favored which leg, who seemed uncertain with their weapon. She filed away every detail while appearing to stare blankly at the frost-covered windows. Time? She needed to buy time. Every minute was another minute for someone to track her location, another minute to find a weakness or opportunity. She thought of Ronan's lessons in strategy, in seeing 3 moves ahead. The winter garden's glass panels creaked in the wind. Water dripped somewhere, a steady metronome. Grace focused on the sound, using it to maintain her calm facade while her mind raced through scenarios and possibilities. Carpin pulled out a phone, presumably to begin his negotiations. Grace kept her eyes on the ivy, counting her breaths, watching frost slowly melt in the weak sunlight. She was afraid, terrified, if she was honest. But fear could be fuel if you knew how to use it. She thought of Ronan saying, "The world will die before it touches you." A promise, not a threat. Whatever the truth about the photographs, whatever game Greta was playing, Grace knew one thing with absolute certainty. Ronan was coming for her. Until then, she would be smart, be patient, stay alive. The winter garden's glass panels caught the noon light, casting fractured shadows across the concrete floor. Carpin circled Grace's chair, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "Men like Ronan Vexley," he mused, trailing fingers across the back of her chair. "They only bleed for what they think is theirs." His smile was shark-like, all teeth and cold intent. Grace lifted her chin. "What if I'm carrying something that is his?" Carpin's laugh bounced off the frost-covered windows. A clever bluff, but... One of his men stepped forward, holding up a manila envelope. "Sir," found this in her bag, hospital letterhead. Grace's heart thundered. The blood work from this morning's visit with her aunt. They'd drawn samples when she'd felt dizzy. She hadn't even seen the results yet. Carpin snatched the paper, eyes scanning. His smile cracked like thin ice. "Twin markers," he read. "Elevated HCG consistent with multiples." He crumpled the paper, face twisting. "Set up the stream, now!" The next 25 minutes crawled by as his men positioned equipment, adjusted lights. Grace focused on the loose screw she'd felt in the chair's arm, slowly working it back and forth against the tape, binding her wrists. The technique Ronan's trainer had demonstrated, practiced until her fingers bled. At 12:40 p.m., footsteps echoed through the garden's entrance. Ronan appeared, coat open to show he was unarmed, hands raised and empty. His eyes found Grace immediately, assessing every inch of her for harm. "Let her walk out," Ronan said, voice carrying in the cold air. "Take me instead." "Noble," Carpin sneered. "But insufficient." He produced a stack of papers. "Sign over the ports, all of them. Then maybe the girl lives." Grace worked the screw faster, feeling the tape begin to give. Through the broken skylights, she caught glimpses of movement, Finn's team taking positions. Ronan was buying them time, keeping all eyes on him. "The ports aren't mine to sign away," Ronan said evenly. "The board." "The board?" Carpin laughed. "We both know you control those old men. Sign." Grace's wrists burned as she sawed at the tape. Almost there. She watched Ronan's face, saw the minute tells she'd learned to read, the slight tension around his eyes, the way his fingers flexed at his sides. He was counting down to something. Glass shattered overhead. Grace dropped to the floor as the first shot cracked through the garden. She rolled under the chair as chaos erupted. Boots on concrete, shouts, more gunfire. "Grace!" Ronan's voice cut through the mayhem. She oriented toward it, crawling on her elbows. 3 of Carpin's men rushed Ronan. He moved like liquid nitrogen, efficient and lethal. The first went down clutching a crushed throat. The second's knee shattered with a crack that echoed off the glass. The third barely had time to raise his weapon, before Ronan broke his arm in 2 places. "Grace!" he called again, giving her his location. She scrambled toward his voice, heart in her throat. 2 shots rang out, Carpin by the door. Ronan grunted, hand going to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Ronan!" The scream tore from her throat as rough hands grabbed her shoulders. Carpin dragged her backward toward a service exit, gun pressed to her temple. "One more step, Vexley, and I paint the walls with her." Ronan straightened, ignoring the blood soaking his shirt. His eyes met Grace's, steady, certain. "I'm coming for you," he promised, voice winter cold and absolute. "Hold on." Finn's voice crackled over comms as he cleared the corridor. South Hall secure, moving to intercept. Carpin's grip tightened painfully on Grace's arm as he backed toward the door. She could feel his pulse racing where his wrist pressed against her shoulder. For all his bravado, he was afraid. Grace cataloged details with desperate clarity. The wet sound of Ronan's breathing, the crunch of glass under boots, the way sunlight caught the frost on dead vines. The clock on the wall read 1:05 p.m. Time stretched like cold honey. Ronan took a single step forward, ignoring Carpen's warning snarl. Blood dripped steadily from his side, but his gaze never wavered. "I promised you the world would die before it touched you," he told Grace softly. "Watch me keep that promise." She believed him. Despite the gun at her head, despite the photographs that had sent her running, despite everything, she believed him. She saw it in the steel of his spine, heard it in the absolute certainty of his voice. Carpen's hand shook slightly against her temple. He could feel it too. The inexorable tide of Ronan's focus, the killing cold in his eyes. This was the man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd survived nameless in the dark until he'd forged himself into something that made monsters tremble. And he was coming for her. The service door creaked behind them as Carpen pulled her backward. Grace kept her eyes locked on Ronan, drawing strength from his unwavering stare. His lips moved silently, counting down. She tensed, ready. Finn's shadow fell across the threshold as he cleared the final corner. Ronan's hands flexed at his sides, blood slick and steady. The winter garden held its breath, glass and frost and violence, suspended in perfect clarity. Grace inhaled slowly, timing her breath to the drip of Ronan's blood on concrete. Whatever came next, she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that he would not stop until she was safe. The man who asked permission to enter her room, who played lonely music in the dark, who wrapped street children in his own coat, he would burn the world to ash to keep his promise. The Winter Garden's loading deck stretched like a concrete tongue over the river. At 1:10 p.m., Carpen dragged Grace backward toward an idling sedan, his grip bruising her arm. Wind whipped off the water, carrying diesel fumes and the distant wail of sirens. A shadow detached from behind a pillar. Grace's stomach dropped as Greta Voss stepped into weak sunlight, elegant as ever, in her tailored suit. "You promised me a seat," Greta said to Carpen, voice precise as a scalpel. "Once the ports transfer, I expect what's mine." Grace's mind raced. The betrayal stung less than the calculation behind it. How long had Greta watched, waited, leaked information bit by bit? The sirens grew louder, but too slow. She needed leverage now. The captains, they lived and died by profit margins, and she had something better than Carpen's strong-arm tactics. "Wait!" Grace's voice echoed off concrete. "The captains, all of them, need to hear this. Your winter numbers are wrong." Carpen's gun pressed harder against her temple. "Shut up!" "No!" Grace raised her voice, knowing the phone's live streaming would catch every word. "I can prove how to triple the margins while keeping the neighborhoods quiet. Ronan's math. I solved it." Finn's fingers flew over his phone. A link went live. Screens lit up as captains joined the feed. Grace drew a steady breath, channeling countless hours of archive work. The container rotation on BDoc creates a 40% lag. Shift the schedule. She rattled off numbers, routes, timing. The optimization was elegant in its simplicity. More profit, less disruption. "And Greta?" Grace's voice hardened. "She sold you all out. Those photos were doctored. Ronan, your phone?" He understood immediately, putting it on speaker. Greta's earlier warning played crystal clear. "The girl is the lever." The effect was immediate. Two of Carpen's own guards stepped back, hands loose on their weapons. The captain's chat exploded with fury. Carpen snarled, shoving Grace aside as he fired wildly. The bullet went wide. He stumbled on uneven concrete, and Ronan was there, driving him back against a river piling with terrible precision. Carpen's own gold chain caught on a rusted hook. He yanked away, overbalanced. The splash was swallowed by the current's roar. Greta turned to run but found Finn waiting, cuffs ready. "The house always wins," he said quietly, snapping steel around her wrists. By 2 p.m., ambulance lights painted the scene in rotating red. Grace watched paramedics try to convince Ronan onto a stretcher. Blood had soaked his entire left side, but he stayed upright through sheer stubbornness. Grace stepped close, placed her palm against his cheek. His skin was too cold. "Please," she whispered. "Let them help." Something in his eyes softened. He allowed them to guide him onto the stretcher, finally letting others carry some weight. The clinic room was hushed at 5 p.m., monitors beeping softly. The doctor finished the last staple in Ronan's side with practiced efficiency. "The wound's clean, minimal muscle damage, and," she smiled, checking a tablet. "The new blood work confirms those twin markers again. Congratulations." Ronan's hand tightened around Grace's. Despite the painkillers and blood loss, his eyes were clear when they met hers. "Guards," he said softly. "Inside the room or outside? Your choice." Grace studied him, this dangerous man who asked permission even now, who had come for her without hesitation, who waited for her answer like it mattered more than anything. Outside, she decided. His smile was slow, genuine, because she was choosing, because she trusted him to keep her safe, because after everything she was still here. The late afternoon sun slanted through windows, painting the sterile room in amber light. Grace sat beside his bed, their fingers intertwined, and felt the weight of the day settling into her bones. Her wrists were bandaged where the tape had rubbed raw. Her shoulders ached from fighting, but she was alive. They both were. Outside the door, she could hear Finn coordinating with the clinic's security, setting up rotating shifts. The captains were still messaging their support after the route optimization reveal. Greta was in custody, her carefully constructed power play crumbling to ash. Ronan's thumb traced slow circles on Grace's palm. His breathing had steadied, some color returning to his face. The doctor had assured them he would recover fully with rest. "I meant it," he murmured. "About the world dying first." "I know." Grace squeezed his hand. "I saw you keep that promise today." He lifted their joined hands, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Even that small motion made him wince, but he didn't let go. The monitors beeped steadily, marking each precious heartbeat. Through the window, the river rolled on, dark water giving no hint of what it had claimed. The winter garden would be processed as a crime scene, frost melting off its broken skylights. But here in this quiet room, Grace felt something else melting, the last of her doubt, her fear of choosing this life, this man. The guards outside shifted positions, a subtle reminder of the world waiting beyond the door. But for now, Grace was content to sit in the amber light, holding Ronan's hand, letting the steady rhythm of his breathing sync with hers. Snow drifted past the residence windows, coating the city in pristine white. 1 week had transformed their world. In the clinic wing, Ronan had recovered with determined focus, submitting to every medical check while coordinating business from his bed. Grace had split her days between his room and the hospital, watching her aunt grow stronger in preparation for transfer. Greta's recorded confessions circulated among the captains, cementing their loyalty as they witnessed her calculated betrayal. The evidence was damning: doctored photos, staged communications, careful manipulation of both sides. She now sat in a secure facility, her dreams of power reduced to a concrete cell. Grace's aunt had moved safely upstate yesterday, settled into a private suite with round-the-clock care and security disguised as medical staff. The relocation went smoothly, carefully choreographed routes ensuring no one tracked the transfer. This morning, snowflakes melted on Grace's coat as Ronan led her toward the chapel. The space held different memories now. Their paper marriage, the warning blessing, the first time she saw him kneel to help that street child. He knelt again now, not to propose. They were already bound by law, but to offer choice. "The provisions stay regardless," he said quietly. "Your aunt's care, your work, your freedom. But I'm asking if you'll keep me, not the arrangement. Me." Grace touched his face, remembering nights that changed everything. The storm when she first chose safety in his arms. The darkness when she chose him for himself. Now morning light painted his scars silver, and she chose again. "I want both," she said. "The man and the safety we built. The king and the quiet mornings. All of it." His hand spread gentle over her belly where their twins grew. "By winter, I swore you'd birth me twins." His voice held wonder now, not command. "By forever, I'll make sure you never doubt why I fought the world." The residence glowed warm at 7 p.m. as they hosted an intimate supper. Finn sat at Ronan's right, watchful even in celebration. 2 trusted captains raised glasses, their loyalty proven by actions during the crisis. Candlelight caught the simple bands on their fingers. Grace studied Ronan's hands as he gestured, remembering how those same fingers had gripped weapons to protect her, had wrapped his coat around a shivering child, had taught her to defend herself. After the meal, music filled the apartment. Ronan sat at the piano, playing a melody he'd composed during recovery, something sweet and haunting that spoke of found family and fought for peace. Grace curled in the window seat beneath the steel glass skylight, sketching nursery plans in a leather-bound book. She drew twin cribs of dark wood, imagining soft blankets and mobile stars, a rocking chair beside floor-to-ceiling windows protected by bulletproof glass, bookshelves for bedtime stories. Every detail balanced beauty with safety, just like their life together. The snow continued falling as night deepened. Around 11 p.m., Ronan lifted her from the window seat, careful of his healing side. "What do you need for tomorrow's appointment?" Grace listed against his shoulder. Scarf for the cold lobby, extra phone charger. Simple things, domestic things, grounding them in the routine they'd built. He carried her to their room, where the city, lights filtered soft through snowfall. The bed was warm, sheets fresh with lavender. Grace traced the nearly healed wound on his ribs, grateful for skilled doctors and his stubborn strength. "Sleep," he murmured. "I'll have everything ready for morning." She curled closer, breathing in his familiar scent of cedar and clean cotton. His arms tightened carefully around her, one hand settling protective over where their children grew. When dawn broke at 6:30 a.m., they were already awake, watching snow paint the world pristine. The kingdom stayed quiet because its monster had fallen in love. The librarian queen kept him humane with archive wisdom and gentle strength. Ronan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Ready." Grace nodded, knowing their security teams were already preparing routes, checking weather conditions, coordinating with the hospital. This was their new normal, protection wrapped in tenderness, danger held at bay by love and strategy. The city stirred below, plows clearing streets, early workers starting their day. From their window, it looked peaceful, beautiful. They had fought to make it so, fought rivals and betrayal, and their own fears. Grace touched her belly, still flat but holding such promise. By winter, their family would grow. By forever, they would keep building this life they'd chosen. Each morning like this one, safe in each other's arms, was another victory. Ronan helped her with her coat, adjusting the scarf just so. His touch lingered, tender despite the calluses earned through violence. She caught his hand, pressed it over her heart. The snow fell steadier now, muffling the world in white. Soon they would head to the hospital, surrounded by guards who knew their roles. But for these quiet moments, they simply held each other, watching dawn paint their city in silver and rose. Every breath felt like a choice, to stay, to love, to protect. Every heartbeat wrote their story deeper. The monster and his queen, building forever from what began as convenience, making their own rules, their own peace, their own happy ending with each new day.